I was lucky enough earlier this year to ride a KTM 450 RFR for the first time. It was a 2016-ish, 2017 model, so trellis frame and the fuel-injected engine, and it actually had the 52mm cone valve forks on it. It was a bike that was used by one of the Dakar guys to train on in the US, so a bit of a storied history of that bike. I am not in a position to be able to afford an actual RFR, so I kind of built my own out of a 690 using the Kit690 kit, and it was just an interesting opportunity to swap bikes with the owner of this RFR. So he rode my 690 and I rode the 450 RFR for a bit, and we kind of traded thoughts on it.
Yeah, this thing really breathes up top.
Right?
It's so linear and it's so smooth, and you just don't have to shift.
No, it's like, I mean, you can, and it's like, yeah, it's got nice torque when you do.
Yeah.
But if you want to let it eat from corner to corner, it
Yeah.
just keeps pulling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
This thing's great.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it, but it's definitely not the same as this.
They're not the same, but
No.
it's good. It's good.
Okay, thanks. Well,
So you see my bike in that picture, which it's a 690, but it's been changed a lot. But it still has the general characteristics of a 690 engine, which is that it doesn't rev a lot, and you have a pretty narrow RPM band to work with, and it actually makes good, happy power in. Where this 450 RFR, like if you wanted to kind of ride slow, conserve energy, you could ride it lower in the rev range. The fueling was perfect. It didn't buck or hesitate or do anything goofy. And if you really wanted to let it sing and you were really trying to go 100%, then you had all this RPM to work with that you can kind of hear right now. And the bike, I mean, minimal vibration. The engine just felt absolutely happy to be spinning like that. Now, I have an FX 450, and that 450 engine is good, but it is nothing like the RFR engine. The RFR engine pulls like a 250F kind of power band, where it's really linear and just builds and builds and builds up to the very top, where the 450 is, you know, really strong mid-range and mid-upper range, but kind of falls off in the over-rev, and you know, you can tell when you need to shift that bike. You can kind of hear me trying to figure out where to shift, when to shift on the RFR, because if you do get it, you know, too low in the rev range, I think my FX 450 has more bottom end torque. But this really wakes up in the mid to top, where, you know, your guys in Dakar who are, you know, really accomplished riders and really making the thing work, they'll actually, you know, this is how they ride them. Where I can only do this for brief periods before I get tired. The frame compared to my 690, it felt very stable. The suspension is actually stiffer on my 690. This bike actually felt a little bit soft for me. It wasn't that I was bottoming it out, it's just that it had a lot of brake dive, and you kind of had to wait for it to settle when you hammered on the brakes. The frame on the 450 is dramatically narrower, so when you're over the bikes, even though they use the same fuel tanks, the 450 just feels so small.
if I ride it too much more, I'm really gonna want one.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I like how that thing, it's super neutral.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can feel the support you built in. You hit a rut or whatever, and it doesn't do the swim.
Yeah, that's what sucks about these stock.
Yeah.
So yes, I have pretty stiff forks on the 690, and that was something that shows up just in terms of the high-speed stability. You hear me say, "Oh, back on my lumbering barge." The 690, you jump on it, and it immediately feels a lot heavier, and your knees are out further. I've got a fairly tall seat on the bike because I kind of like that, but it makes the bike feel a lot bulkier. It's a little bit less responsive, and it is a lot heavier. That 450 RFR is a light bike compared to the 690. I bet it's every bit of 50 pounds lighter. If you look at the specs on the engine, the 450, you know, the FX 450 engine, which you can find specs for, is about 25 pounds lighter than the 690 engine all by itself. And then, you know, there's several bolt-ons and bobbles on the 690 that are, you know, they're carbon fiber on the 450, and the 690, they're things that I made in my garage.
This feels really big. Really big after riding that.
Yeah. I got back on this and I'm like, where's the torque? But it feels so little.
Right. Yeah. Crazy. So many of the same parts can be such a different bike.
And you can hear the owner of the 450 say, oh, where's the torque? That is one thing that is nice about the 690s. Like, if you listen to kind of how I'm riding it, I'm short shifting it because it makes all of its torque in the mid-range. If you rev this bike over 7,500 RPM, it's really not very happy, and it kind of feels like there's a soft limiter or something because the power falls off so aggressively. And it means you're really stuck operating between like 4 and 7,500 RPM. But it does kind of chug along at the bottom if you're kind of being lazy with it, and it'll still pull you out of a corner. The other major thing I think is the 690 is electronic throttle, and it just doesn't have the snap. It's got a lot of power output, but it doesn't have the snappiness that the rally bike has, which it's just a totally different feel. That quick throttle response really makes the bike feel lighter, or, you know, vice versa. The 690 feels heavier because you can't just kind of whack the throttle and stand it up the same way. You definitely kind of feel the ECM thinking for you sometimes, but overall super cool to be able to compare the bikes directly. I'm really happy with how my 690 performs, but the 450 RFR is definitely a more special feeling bike. The transmission is better, the gear spacing is better, the gears are much tighter spaced. The 690 are always, there's one gear for any situation in the 690. Generally with a 450, you could be in, you know, any of 2 or maybe 3 gears and still do just fine and not really feel like the bike's complaining about it. Also, I think the shock fade on the 690 is a bigger problem, where the 450 has a full-size shock on it. The 690 has this kind of tiny shock, and it doesn't have a lot of fluid volume, and it really struggles if you're really pounding on it for a long time. So my bike is valved so that it feels good when it's hot and faded, but when you first get on it, it's really stiff and beats the crap out of you, because that's the only way I've found to make it work. Look for other videos on the 690 if you are curious what all I've done to it. It's nowhere near a stock bike anymore, but thought this was an interesting opportunity to compare the actual RFR and then what a guy like me can maybe build, or what the average guy can build out of the 690.